Chapter 334 to 336. Gato smugly climbed the ladder towards the top of the bridge from his ship anchored underneath it. He could already see the surprised and enraged expression of Raiga. His plan was impeccable. Making a deal with the Sound Village would certainly allow Gato to spread his influence far and wide. Sure, he could not double-cross them to save money, but these were not some rogue ninjas nobody would miss. No, this deal was a game-changer for Gato. He could push his influence into the major nations with the Sound Village as his backer. To think all it would take is a bit of financial support. Gato shook his head. He knew there would be a much bigger price in the future, but he didn't really care. He had enough money, and while he was indeed greedy and stingy, even he could admit that much, he didn't become one of the richest men by not knowing when to let go of temporary benefits for long-term fortune. Gato was aware that once this plan is successful, the Sound Village would most likely want to use his new position as the hidden ruler of the Land of Waves to spread their own influence. Gato was a businessman, however. He wanted to be the top dog. That's why he started with his profession, but he didn't care to rule over people. He liked to order his grunts around, but being responsible for their actions and well-being? No, thank you. That was not for him. Being a tyrant suited him quite well. He had it all. Power, even if only indirect one. Wealth, and yes, it was satisfying knowing most of it was taken from someone else. Women, Gato did love the resignation on the faces of his bed-warmers, and the fact they were unwilling and illegal slaves did not bother him at all. Letting the Sound Village use the Land of Waves as their outpost would not bother Gato at all as long as his businesses would not be affected. Who cared about these poor bastards anyway? Finally reaching the top of the bridge, Gato quickly but silently ordered his thugs to gather around him. It was time to give Raiga Kurosuke the surprise of a lifetime. While the man would most definitely slaughter Gato if he didn't have allies, he would no doubt not expect the Sound Ninjas to stab him in the back. What Gato didn't expect was to see Raiga at the mercy of an unknown petite woman who held a sword under his neck, but that only made Gato halt for a second before a grin again sprang up on his face. I knew I should have never trusted Raiga. Honestly, the man can't even complete the mission despite having reinforcements. Gato exasperatedly thought. It didn't matter to him that Raiga lost. The two famous Jonins, Zabuza and Kakashi, seemed dead on their feet. That meant Raiga did his money's worth, not that Gato intended to pay him. As for the two women, Gato spared them a cursory leer before disregarding them. Oh, he would certainly order his men to capture them, but he didn't deem them a threat. That's why when the red-headed woman let Raiga go and turned towards Gato, her ice-cold eyes looking straight at him and making him involuntarily shudder, Gato didn't care that it seemed the rogue ninja betrayed him. He was confident in his preparations and allies. Scum as always, eh, Gato? Raiga sneered, looking at the gathering of bloodthirsty thugs, making Gato widely grin at the naive fool. If you did your job well, I wouldn't have needed to take things into my own hands. You have only yourself to blame. Gato confidently exclaimed, pushing his nose up to stare at Raiga, who was at least 3 times as tall as the midget. I see. Raiga lowered his head and tightly clutched the Kiba blades. Betrayal was a common sight in the life of a rogue ninja, but that didn't mean Raiga liked the feeling of being betrayed. Sakon! Jirubu! Take care of the fool! Gato shouted, pointing at Raiga. Sakon and Jirubu appeared among the gathered thugs, looking quite irritated at their role of nanny for the short stuff. Alas, Orochimaru ordered them to keep the wealthy midget happy and safe so he can pay them for their efforts. Keeping him safe was easy. There was no one with enough balls to oppose Gato in the Land of Waves. Keeping him happy, however. Sakon could only sigh in exasperation. Sakon, persuade that woman. Sakon, show him the error of their ways. Sakon, can't you use your ability to make me taller? Sakon, Seikon. For fuck's sake, one of these days I am going to gut the short piece of shit. Seikon ground his teeth. Calm down, brother. His usefulness will run out eventually. Your time will come. Ukon, who was hidden in Seikon's body, mentally responded, getting an annoyed grunt of reluctant agreement from Seikon. As for Jirubu, as long as he was fed and watered, he didn't care much. He knew he was on the bodyguard duty because of his strong defensive earth jutsus. He also knew his intelligence would prevent Gato from giving him complicated tasks. That was perfectly fine for him. Sakon could have them. Hey. He may not be the smartest, but he surely knew how to make use of it to get less work and more food. All it took was to offhandedly lie that the more he ate, the stronger his earth jutsu became, and he received an all-you-can-eat buffet from Gato. Frankly, Jirubo didn't dislike his current job. Not at all. When Raiga saw the two sound ninjas, he raised his eyebrow at them. Wasn't there supposed to be only 3 sound ninjas? Where did these two come from? Outwardly, however, he amusedly spoke, intending to provoke his opponents. Who? That's it? A fatso and freak? Jirubo's eyebrow twitched, and his lips curled into a sneer. He understood the insult. Nevertheless, he turned toward Sakon and smirked. He called you fat. The high-pitched, whiny sound of repressed irritation was so worth it. Whatever, Sakon eventually muttered, his expression scrunched in a grimace. Let's just deal with them so you can go back to gorging yourself to an early death. As if you and your brother didn't have your pick of women under Gato. Jirubu scoffed with an eye roll in his last retort, before he turned around and focused on Raiga when they arrived in the space in between the gatherings of Gato's thugs, and the spot where the 2 women and 2 exhausted jonins stood, intent on watching the spectacle. Zabuza was quite amused at the carefree attitude of these two, while Kakashi looked at them as if they were idiots. Ringo didn't care enough, so she just indifferently wondered how much time would she waste, here and Anko. Well, she had an inkling the two had no idea how strong Raiga was, and probably thought their allies were still in the game. Poor bastards, she snickered. Raiga looked at the 2 cocky brats, because 15-year-old shits didn't deserve to be called adults, and inwardly sighed. Such confidence and arrogance, to think I was once like them. He wryly grimaced, remembering his own past self before his ass came in contact with Ringo's boot. Unknown to the 3 combatants, just as their clash was about to commence, they thought the exact same thing. Well, let's just get this over with. I will finish this in a jiffy. Sakon and Jirubu rushed at Raiga with their low jonin speed, surmising that after dealing with 2 Konoha A-rank jonins, he must be tired enough for them to take him on. Despite not being the strongest in the Sound Village, both Sakon and Jirubu were a part of the Sound 4, Orochimaru's elite squad. While individually their strength wasn't all that great, barely scraping low to mid jonin levels, they were trained to be the strongest when fighting together. It wasn't a problem for the Sound 4 to take down even high A-rank rogue ninjas with their superb teamwork and individual fighting styles that covered each other's weaknesses. Yes, they really thought the 2 of them were more than enough for one tired S-rank ninja. Plus, there was always Ukon hiding inside of Sakon, ready to react at a moment's notice if necessary and spring up a trap. The second Sakon or Ukon manages to meld with their opponent's body, it is game over. Seeing the eager expressions on his 2 quickly approaching opponents, Raiga grimaced and prepared his blades. He didn't particularly like that he was all but ordered to end these skilled but cocky teens. Since he took Ranmaru in, he grew somewhat soft. The fact Kakashi was still breathing after their 2 encounters was irrefutable proof of that. The 2 teens were almost upon Raiga when he suddenly released an intense surge of lightning chakra, and the world halted for them. On the sidelines, Kakashi humorlessly chuckled when his Sharingan failed to spot when Raiga struck due to the sudden burst of his speed. The bastard was holding back? He thought sourly as his pride stung, yet he was also grateful towards Raiga for taking it easy on them. A split second passed since Raiga disappeared and reappeared right in between and slightly behind the two stunned sound ninjas who stood frozen in their spots. Blood was quickly evaporating from Raiga's Kiba blades due to the intense electric energy coursing through them, and a charred line slowly appeared on both Sakon and Jirubu. Sakon's upper and lower body was diagonally separated at the waist. His eyes were wide in disbelief as his upper body slid down his lower, both cuts already burned shut, so no guts nor blood started gushing out. He realized he did not feel his legs a moment later before he started screaming bloody murder. Jirubu had more luck. His bulky stature and earth nature prevented Raiga's blades from cleaving him in two like happened to Sakon. Instead, he only had a burnt gash going through his gut that didn't reach the spine. If it wasn't burnt shut, it would be a debilitating injury. But since Raiga's lightning sealed the wound shut, Jirubu could still fight. He survived worse injuries under Orochimaru. Nevertheless, he slowly fell onto his knees from the pain and stifled a moan of pure agony as his body needed a brief break. Raiga turned around in order to face his opponents and raised one of his blades towards the sky. Lightning release, final descent, and impassively intoned the name of his jutsu. Ukon, who was hiding inside of the screaming Sakon, suddenly widened his eyes, realizing he was somehow found out. It pained him to see his brother in such a pitiful state, but there was still a chance for an unexpected ambush, since Ukon didn't show himself for the entire battle, however brief it was. Now that he was discovered, he understood that his chances to surprise Raiga were nil. So when he saw the S-rank ninja charging a lightning jutsu aimed right at the screaming Sakon, brother or not, Ukon quickly jumped out of Sakon's body, separating from him and creating a distance between them just as a resounding boom deafened the surrounding, drowning Sakon's screams as lightning strike descended right on top of him. Jirubo also managed to only widen his eyes as his breath hitched while he desperately pushed himself on his feet. Alas, he was too late, and far too close to Sakon. When the lightning struck, Jirubo was brutally flung to the side like yesterday's trash, his body tearing apart in various places. The lightning jutsu was accompanied by a brief blue flash that managed to blind most of the spectators. And when they finally managed to refocus on the battle, all they could see was the gaping Ukon, with Raiga behind him as the young man's body split into two parts. A vertical burnt cut going from the top of his head all the way towards his groin and slowly fell down in the opposite directions. Unfortunately for the three sound ninjas, they horrendously overestimated their own strength and terribly underestimated their enemy. It was true that Raiga was physically and mentally tired. It was also true that he had just a bit more than half of his chakra left in his reserves after fighting Kakashi and Zabuza. But he was still an S-rank ninja, and that meant something. He was qualitatively on a different level than some low jonin upstarts, even if he was exhausted. The second he activated his lightning release, full body activation, it was over. Raiga didn't give them even a chance to activate their cursed seals. Turning towards Gato's group, Raiga could see the businessman gaping at the gruesome death of the sound ninjas and failing to believe his own eyes. He expected them to effortlessly win. Flinching as he realized the ex-Kiri swordsman was staring right at him, Gato's pupils dilated. He understood the precarious situation he found himself in. "Wah!" Gato started speaking, trying to make an offer now that he lost his most capable bodyguards to the man he ordered to be killed. He didn't manage to even utter the first word from his sentence, however, as Raiga again disappeared in a burst of lightning chakra, and before Gato's brain could even comprehend what happened, he, with horrified realization, found a tip of the Kiba blade sticking out of his chest. Unlike his handling of the sound ninjas, Raiga held no pity for Gato. He ruthlessly raised his Kiba blade upward, forcefully lifting the midget's body as blood leaked from his wound. There was no lightning coating on the blade, hence the wound was not seared shut either. Gato helplessly dangled his feet above the ground, trying to plead for help, but no words could leave his mouth as he started choking on blood. His eyes begged the thugs around to do something, but they were too shocked at the brutality and ease at which Raiga appeared in their midst, without them even noticing. "It is nice of you to willingly come to your own funeral, Gato." Raiga grinned and let his lightning chakra slowly seep into the Kiba blade sticking through Gato's body. Since the output was low and the process slow, the blade was not hot enough to instantly burn a wound shut. It was still scorching hot and steam started to rise from the chest wound. Horror appeared on Gato's face before he started screaming. The blood rushing up his neck prevented him from doing that, and most of his wails sounded more like wet gurgles while his body shook as electricity coursed through it, painfully contracting his muscles, tearing some of them in the process. It was painfully obvious Raiga was torturing Gato in his last moments, and the sadistic but satisfied grin on his face clearly indicated the man enjoyed every second of it. A minute of pain-filled wailing later, Gato's body helplessly slumped forward, unable to bear the strain of so much lightning chakra coursing through it. The supposedly richest businessman in the world was dead. "Now then," Raiga flickered his blade to the side, uncaringly throwing Gato's body away, and turned towards the scared hired thugs who were shaking in their boots. "I think it is high time to end this farce." A massacre ensued. Kakashi and Anko sat opposite Ringo, Zabuza, and Raiga at the table in Tazuna's house, awkwardly staring at each other. Kakashi and Zabuza were from time to time worriedly glancing at Raiga, who completely and effortlessly ignored them, while Anko and Ringo were telepathically communicating, throwing jokes about the fidgeting males around the table at each other and competing who would say a better, or rather more vulgar, one. Since Tsunade first introduced Anko as her apprentice to Rei and his other wives, Ringo and Anko hit it off, thanks to their similar personalities. Separated from both groups sat awkward Tayuya, who had no idea how to act in her current situation, and next to her was tied up Gurren with gag in her mouth, making her able to only silently glare at both Konoha and Kiri groups. On the other side of the table, the three Genins from Team 7 quietly observed the situation, while next to them, Haku elegantly enjoyed a rice ball, not even a little bothered by the suffocating atmosphere. Tazuna's dining room was quite full. "Are you sure this is fine?" Kakashi had finally had enough and nervously asked Anko. While he was de facto the leader of Team 7 on the paper, anyone who saw how the team worked knew that even though Kakashi led the Genins, Anko was the one who called the most important decision like this one. Kakashi didn't really like the outcome of this mission. He knew well there was nothing he or even Anko could do with how the situation ensued. With the Mizukage present, neither of them could do anything rash, no matter that he didn't like how the Mizukage basically took ownership of Raiga, which meant that Kirigakure just gained an extremely strong S-rank ninja, but going as far as giving them both of their prisoners who were defeated by Anko. Now that Kakashi thought to be a bit unfair. Anko heard his question and just rolled her eyes. "Yeah, it is safer this way." "What do you mean?" Kakashi furrowed his eyebrows at her vague answer. "You defeated them, so it is only fair that Konoha should get them." Personally, Kakashi couldn't care less about the fate of the two sound kunoichis, but he knew what would happen if he didn't even try. The Konoha Council won't call Chunin Anko to answer their questions. They will call him the team leader and Jonin instructor, and they will scream their throats raw at him once they find out his team relinquished their Jonin-level prisoners to Kirigakure. "For the love of Sage, what did I do in my past life to suffer being on this team?" Kakashi inwardly cried and bemoaned his fate. "Kakashi," Anko sighed. "While we are strong, I don't want to risk being ambushed by the sound ninjas. It wouldn't be a bother for you and me, but what about our students?" she reasoned. "It's not well known, but the Sound Village is led by Orochimaru and these two," She casually pointed at the two quiet women, the redhead resigned and the gagged brunette glaring at Anko, trying to combust her with her gaze. Are one of his best. He might torture them. He might mark them like cattle. He might even experiment on them. But Orochimaru is not an idiot. He knows there is a difference between losing an unimportant pawn and losing a bishop he cultivated for years. The crystal user alone is worth a lot. Kakashi had to admit she had a point. The bloodline of the crystal user will most likely be the biggest reason why the council will scream at him. He could easily picture Orochimaru wanting to save her once he hears she was captured. As for Anko's real reason why she tried to pawn them to Ringo, frankly, if she dragged these two to Konoha and gave them to Tsunade, or if Ringo took them, their final destination would not change at all. Anko didn't see a reason to bother with them and would rather dump them on Ringo's shoulders. Then again, she couldn't just tell that to Kakashi, could she? Like it or not, if we took them with us to Konoha, there would be a high chance their comrades would ambush us and try to free them. The Mizukage not only has 2 S-rank and 2 Jonin-level ninjas in her party, but she is also heading in a completely opposite direction from us. Leaving them with her is safer, Anko said, knowing she was laying it on a bit thick when she saw how Kakashi's gaze started to soften. She knew she had him. Before Kakashi could verbally react, however, Ringo snorted. Right, the woman whose dream is to kill Orochimaru is giving away the perfect bait for the man. Yeah, nope. Pick another one. Anko, you suck at lying with a straight face. She deadpanned with a teasing tone lacing her voice. Oh, come on! Anko indignantly exclaimed and pointed at Kakashi next to her while staring straight into Ringo's eyes. I am not that bad. The Cyclops would totally believe it if you didn't say that. Ringo lifted her eyebrows in surprise and turned towards Kakashi. You would? She asked in a bewildered tone. Kakashi suddenly found himself between a rock and hard place. What was he supposed to say to that? If he confirmed it, he would come out as a naive idiot, and if he denied it, he would paint himself as an easily fooled moron. All eyes in the room abruptly shifted towards him, and Kakashi could feel a cold sweat forming under his multi-layered face covers. There was only one way to get out of this predicament. Well, it's Anko. One never knows when it comes to her. Kakashi coolly shrugged in the most casual way he could muster at the moment and gave Ringo his best eye smile. By the way, Lady Mizukage, I wonder why Zabuza was our reinforcements instead of somebody from Konoha. Could you enlighten me? I intended to ask Lady Tsunade, but since you are already here... He trailed off. Ringo's lips twitched upward. Indeed. She turned towards the shocked Anko, who couldn't believe the way Kakashi flipped the situation around. It's Anko. Ringo amusedly shook her head. As for your question, she looked towards the annoyed Anko. I sent a message to Lady Tsunade, who is a friend of Lady Ringo. Lady Tsunade knew Ringo was interested in Raiga and the Kiba blades, so she sent her a message, Anko said. And Zabuza was the closest guy, so I sent him his orders alongside the summoning scroll the second I heard Raiga was involved. The Kiba blades were out of Kirigakure for way too long. There is really nothing much else to it, Ringo said, before giving Raiga a meaningful look, making him petulantly avert his eyes. Don't worry about being reprimanded for the prisoners either. Tsunade is reasonable when she wants to be. That's unsurprisingly not reassuring at all. Kakashi inwardly deadpanned. What the hag said, Anko quipped before yelping as Ringo kicked her in the shin under the table. Hey! Anko took that as a personal challenge, and soon enough, the two women started a childish kick-a-shin war while the whole room full of trained killers stared at them in bewilderment. These are S-rank kunoichi? Zabuza thought in disbelief, as his jaw hung a bit low from watching the spectacle. And I swore lifelong loyalty to this woman. Raiga hung his head low as he watched the Mizukage acting like a total brat. Let's pretend we don't know her. The Genins of Team 7 thought at the same time with blank stares aimed at the grinning Anko, unknowingly showing off their superb teamwork. Kakashi was somewhat used to Anko's antics, but even he was flabbergasted. This was the Mizukage they were dealing with, the strongest and most respected ninja of her village, and Anko was kicking her, with her chakra-enhanced strength no less. I am too young for this shit. Kakashi tiredly sighed. As for stopping them, well, he quite liked his ability to breathe, so getting in between the two women was a big no-no.